Okay, chapter 3, the apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, revelations concerning the nature of humanity and the gods. So we're in book 1, chapter 3. From what I understand, there's actually 4 books within this. So at some point, when we get to book 2, we might start all over again from chapter 1. So this is chapter 3 of the first book. It's called The Silver Age. As you have learned, each new age of humanity was ushered in by a significant event, usually cataclysmic and world-altering in nature. The transition from the Golden Age to the Silver Age was no exception. After millennia of peaceful coexistence between Atlanteans and Natufians, internal strife among the sons of God erupted into a vicious civil war that has been well documented by Ovid, Diodorus, Plato, and many other revered ancient writers. These accounts overlap and intertwine, painting a clear portrait for those who have eyes to see. The Atlanteans are the Olympians, the gods from ancient Greek mythology. The war in heaven is the battle between Cronus and Zeus, which is the Greek Titanomachy, a 10-year battle between the Titans and the Olympians. These figures and events are one and the same, described by different writers using different names, but the similarities are unmistakable. You shall now see just how significant the events of this age were and continue to be for all inhabitants of the planet and beyond. Rise of the Olympians. Perhaps you have been taught that Plato is the only ancient source that reveals the story of Atlantis. Indeed, one scholar by the name of Robin Waterfield proclaims there is only one source that establishes the existence of Atlantis, and that source is Plato, with nothing before or after that is independent of him. Yet this same scholar has translated numerous works by Diodorus, who clearly describes the Atlanteans in Book 3 of his Bibliotheca Historica. But since we have made mention of the Atlanteans, we believe that it will not be inappropriate in this place to recount what their myths relate about the genesis of the gods, in view of the fact that it does not differ greatly from the myths of the Greeks. Now the Atlanteans, dwelling as they do in the regions on the edge of the ocean and inhabiting a fertile territory, are reputed far to excel their neighbors in reverence towards the gods and the humanity that they showed in their dealings with strangers, and the gods, they say, were born among them. And that's from chapter 56 of Diodorus's book, Bibliotheca Historica. Was Waterfield one thoroughly versed in other works by Diodorus, unaware of this description of the inhabitants of Atlantis, living in the shadow of Mount Atlas, and their similarity to the ancient Greek gods of Mount Olympus? What say you, seeker of truth? By ignoring Diodorus's his detailed account of Atlantis, scholars such as Waterfield, the rest of academia, and the ruling class have decided you and other seekers like you. Such an omission from the curriculum traditionally taught to humankind is so egregious that it cannot possibly be a mistake, but is rather the result of an active effort at deception. And this is to conceal the existence of Atlantis and its people, the descendants of whom are walking among us today, dictating world events in ways about which you shall soon learn. Yeah, the intentional censorship of true history. I've been talking about that for years and years on this channel. In his account, Diodorus points to the same geographical location that Plato identifies and says that civilization was destroyed in the same way Plato describes, a violent cataclysm, a natural disaster of proportions that beggar the human imagination. He calls these individuals by the same name as well, Atlanteans, and says, "The gods were born among them," meaning the gods of the Greco-Roman world were Atlanteans. Diodorus explains the story he tells is not his own, nor Plato's, but rather relayed from another book written by Dionysius Skytobrachion, an author who lived in Alexandria, resting place of the famed library, giving him access to the best source material that ever existed in the ancient world. The same source bequeaths us a story of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstatic experiences, who was reported to have been born in Libya and traveled all over the Mediterranean, meaning his roots are in the vicinity of Atlantis of old. You surely have been taught about the Greco-Roman gods, but what you have not learned is that those stories are not fanciful legends, but rather historical accounts about the Atlanteans, whom the less advanced people took for gods. The mythology around the Olympians and their mighty deeds throughout the Mediterranean is, in fact, an account of the Atlanteans' impressive accomplishments. Diodorus provides another perspective on the history recounted in the chapter of the Golden Age, from a source that academia pretends does not even exist. For example, while Plato gives a mythological genealogy of Poseidon, who had a series of 5 identical twins, Diodorus says Uranus, the Atlanteans' first king, the one who caused his subjects to cease from their lawless ways and bestial manner of living, is the father of 45 sons by a number of wives, of whom Atlas, the eponymous king of Atlantis, is the first. Plato calls Atlas his brother Gadirius, the brother who is known as Cronos in Diodorus's account. According to Diodorus, Atlas's mother, Tityea, and one of Atlas's brothers was a Titan named Hyperion, who married his sister, Basilia, and had a son and a daughter, Helios and Selene, or Selene. After the death of Uranus, other Titans murdered Hyperion and Helios, concerned that the whole kingdom of Atlantis would pass to his father and son, much loved by the Atlanteans. Selene, stricken with grief, committed suicide after learning of these evil deeds, and Basilia went into a self-imposed exile, later becoming known to the Pythagoreans, or not the Pythagoreans, sorry, the Phrygians, as the great mother of Cybele. As made plain in Plato's record and revealed in the last chapter, Poseidon's kingdom, referred to as Uranus's kingdom in Diodorus, was divided between Atlas and Cronus, with Atlas taking the region of the kingdom bordering the Atlantic Ocean and Cronus taking those bordering the Mediterranean. Cronus took the Maghreb, while Atlas had the southern mountains and the land known today as Mauritania. Diodorus's account also provides more detail about Atlas's progeny. The Atlanteans practiced a form of stellar ancestor worship in which they figuratively raised important people who died into the heavens and named a star after them. When Helios and Selene died, he was honored as the sun and she as the moon. Diodorus says that before the sun was referred to as such, people called it the holy fire. But after the deaths of Helios and Selene, those heavenly bodies took on their honorific names Likewise, after her death, Titia transformed into G, or Gaia, Mother Earth. Uranus, receiving honors as great as his achievements in life, became the sky itself, the firmament upon which all stars are fixed. The Pleiades and the Hyades, together forming the Golden Gate of the ecliptic, and the Hesperides, are all highly important star formations for navigators, and they are all named after children of King Atlas. In Greek mythology, the Pleiades, the most famous star cluster with 7 visible stars, are the 7 daughters of Atlas. In life, they were known as the Atlantides. A civil war. After Cronus took control of the northern region, he married his sister Rhea, also known as Pandora, and together they had a son named Zeus. In mythology, Cronus worried about eventually being overthrown by his son and began eating his own children as soon as they were born. Evidence from the region of Cronus's kingdom in the Maghreb, in the Maghreb, suggests that some Iberomauriscians may have practiced cannibalism for thousands of years, but in this case, the myth is slightly different from reality. The real Cronus did not eat his own progeny, but his people did conduct religious observations in which human children were sacrificed and consumed in his honor. This practice was condemned under no uncertain terms by the broader Atlantean kingdom, and punishments meted out were severe. From over 30 caves throughout the Maghreb, your scientists have recovered more than 500 bodies of Iberomauriscians, many of which had one or more of their incisors forcibly removed, and fitting punishment for their cannibalistic ways. Women and young adults who engaged in cannibalism were not spared, and they were marked for life along with men who engaged in this horrific practice. In the Greek myths, Zeus is so outraged at being offered stew made with human flesh that he destroys the world with a flood. But this is not a complete account. Cronus was a mad king who saw eating humans being as extending his own life, allowing him to live forever, and refuse his own son a throne. This violated Atlantean custom and law, and as a result, Zeus, who was loved by the people of the Mediterranean, went beyond the Pillars of Hercules to recruit the help of his uncle Atlas. In Greek mythology, this battle is known as the Titanomachy, a 10-year civil war between the Titans, led by Cronus, and the Olympians, led by Zeus. Plato describes a similar war between forces beyond the Pillars of Hercules, those of Cronus, and those within the Mediterranean. Even in Judeo-Christian mythos, angels rebelled against God, resulting in the war in heaven. Just as the rebellious angels lost and were cast out of heaven, in the Atlantean civil war described by both Diodorus and Plato, the forces of Cronos were defeated and ultimately cast out of the Atlantean kingdom. According to myth, Cronus was imprisoned in Tartarus, but as you shall see, others left the Maghreb and sailed around Africa to the land between 2 rivers. Over the millennia, after the descendants of the expelled armies took over the societies throughout the Mediterranean, they began editing history to make themselves sound like forces of good in this war, and the true Atlanteans as the forces of evil. In their telling, Atlas is still ever the powerful Titan, but he fights on one side of Cronus. Those Revisionist stories claim Atlas led an assault on Zeus, almost won, and was made to hold up the sky as punishment. But in fact, this is simply an allegory about Mount Atlas, the ultra-prominent peak that appears to hold up the sky. A land between two rivers. Cronus was imprisoned after losing the war, and his army and followers were completely expelled from the Atlantean kingdom. The exiled Titans had to leave by the quickest route without entering any part of the kingdom, so they ventured south from the Pillars of Hercules along the Atlantic coast, circumnavigating Africa, sailing into the Persian Gulf and finally into the Euphrates. The exiles chose this location because they knew the Natufians and the other tribes of the region would worship them as gods for their knowledge, technological advancement, and stature, as had already happened among Adam's people. There is ample evidence of the practicability of such a voyage. You have already learned of the voyages of Thor Heyerdahl, but let us also take, for example, the Phoenicians, whom an Egyptian pharaoh commissioned to circumnavigate Africa 2,600 years ago. They started in the Red Sea, sailed out through the Gulf of Aden, all around the South Africa, or all the way around South Africa, and up in the Atlantic coast, through the Pillars of Hercules, back into Egypt. The story of that original voyage was passed down through millennia. The Phoenicians knew how to make this journey because their ancestors, the expelled followers of Kronos, had done so after their loss. They simply traveled in the other direction. Furthermore, the very beginning of the histories of Herodotus also discuss the Phoenicians who lived in Byblos, Sidon, Tyre, Baalbek, and other cities in the land of Canaan, and says they had their origin on the shores of the Persian Gulf, referring to the site of the expelled army's landing. Once they came ashore, they spread out and eventually made it to the Levant, Anatolia, and Greece. According to the stories, the Euphrates is exactly where the Natufians observed their gods arriving. When Cronus' loyalists made their egress into the Middle East by traveling up the Euphrates, they reached Mesopotamia, the land between the Euphrates and the Tigris. Here they found the climate to be much different than the tropical Atlantean kingdom from which they had departed. As Earth was still in the grips of the last ice age, the climate in Mesopotamia would have been considerably colder than it is today, subjecting and expelled Atlanteans to the first winter, and thus giving credence to Ovid's mythology, which states that the Silver Age introduced winter to mankind. When they arrived in Mesopotamia, Cronus' followers made an impression on the people there, who recorded their story. Because of the carbohydrate-rich diet introduced by Adam and carried on by his Natufian descendants, the people of this region were much shorter than the former Atlanteans who landed on their shores and built cities all along the Euphrates. As with earlier encounters in the Levant, the exiles' massive size and advanced technologies made them seem like gods. The Eridu Genesis, an ancient Mesopotamian epic recounting the creation of worlds, talks about beings arriving from heaven, referring to these tall, impressive people coming from the Atlantean kingdom. The ancient Mesopotamians said their gods arrived from the sea, founded cities, and ruled over them like kings. In addition to the Eridu Genesis, another creation epic called the Atrahasis tells of the gods moving in, establishing cities, and beginning to practice agriculture. At first, the Igigi, the laboring class of gods, or the laboring class of gods, do all of the work, but eventually they revolt, wanting something else to do, or wanting something else to do the work for them. One of the gods is sacrificed, so his blood can be mixed with earth, creating 7 male and 7 female humans. Thus, Mesopotamians' view of themselves was as creations made to grow food and brew beer for the gods who ruled over them. It's getting into the Anunnaki stuff that we've talked about a lot on this channel. Other Mesopotamian myths, such as Era and Ishum and Adapa, discuss the 7 sages whom they call Apkallu, a group who taught the less advanced people living in Mesopotamia the arts of civilization, such as how to plow fields and tend to the other burdens Cronus' followers demanded of them. Yet others make mention of the Anunnaki, the ruling council of 7 gods composed of Enlil, Enki, and 5 other powerful deities. While the ruling class of Cronus' loyalists craved the servitude of the people of Mesopotamia, they also became obsessed with human overpopulation and the need to control it. Oh, kind of like what's going on now with Agenda 2030 in the World Economic Forum. See where all this comes from? The chief god in the Mesopotamian pantheon was Enlil, a vain, selfish entity who did not like humans and complained endlessly about the racket they made. Interrupting his rest, he unleashed genocide after genocide on the Mesopotamian humans to control their numbers. The beginning of the eugenics 15,000 years ago. Its roots are in the dehumanization of Natufians by the unruly defeated soldiers of Cronus. Enlil viewed the Natufians as beasts of burden and wanted to cull the herd, preventing the possibility of another uprising. You know, it talks about this in the Book of Mormon, also 3 Nephi chapter 8. Basically, I think 3 Nephi chapter 8 might be the retelling of this exact same story here, where the people are, protesting, making noise, and then God wipes them out. Regular genocide by disease and famine run in opposition to the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, followed by the king Atlas and his people. Thus, the exiles of the war were no longer Atlanteans in their way of living. The Eridu Genesis says the first city of the gods founded was Eridu, but that is a distortion resulting from generations of retelling, and the true name of the location has been lost to time. Modern-day dating methods rule that place out as the first founding, and you should know that your human scientists have yet to find the real first city of the exiles. Okay, next part is entitled Arrival of the Watchers. The Atlantean exiles continued sailing up the Euphrates, establishing cities wherever they went. Evidence of their presence has been well documented in everything from the arrowheads and the bladelets left behind to the skeletons recovered from the Natufian territory. Like those found in caves in the Maghreb, these skulls have their central incisors forcibly removed, suggesting that that either Cronus' descendants or Natufians who received a similar punishment. The transitioning to the River Jordan, the exiles finally, by transitioning to the River Jordan, the exiles finally arrived in the Levant, where they encountered a Natufian named Enoch, who came to call these visitors the Watchers. Let us see what he had to say, for the book of Enoch is primarily concerned with the arrival and exploits of these gods, corroborating what the people of Mesopotamia had earlier observed. The oldest extant copies or excerpts of the book of Enoch were in a collection found in a cave at Qumran and known today as the Dead Sea Scrolls. But even in that form, the book was spliced together from many other much older texts. It is a collage of numerous sacred stories whose true antiquity is unknown to your modern scientists. The earliest versions today, or known today, are 2,300 years old, and those were already compilations of much older tales. Until the Dead Sea Scrolls Library was found, the only complete copy of the Book of Enoch was in the Ethiopian Bible, written in the ancient Semitic language of Ge'ez. Through the canonical Old Testament references Enoch, though the canonical Old Testament references Enoch and the events described in the Book of Enoch, and though the Old Testament's Epistle of Jude heavily references it as well, the book itself is not part of the canon. It is part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church canon alone. The Dead Sea Scrolls Library revealed the same story found in the Ge'ez version, essentially verbatim without changes or edits. It is an antediluvian story before the flooding of Eden described in the book of Jubilees, which we will have occasion to discuss further on. The Great Global Flood occurred around 12,800 years ago, so the events of Enoch are even older, and his history has been passed down for millennia, changing and recombining the process. Enoch says 200 watchers landed at Mount Hermon in the Levant, likely arriving by way of the river Jordan via the Euphrates, which flowed near Abu Huraira in those days. The Bible describes watchers as angels or holy ones come down from heaven, sometimes individually but often in pairs, to give specific warnings and guidance to humans on earth. Note, for example, the book of Daniel, which records King Nebuchadnezzar's words. I saw in a vision of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus. And note, the book who tell Lot to leave before God And note the book of Genesis, which records the appearance of two angels who tell Lot to leave before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Even the Native American myths that shall be shared in a coming chapter, record watchers arriving individually or with a partner. That's referencing Daniel and the book of Genesis in the King James Bible. In no case did those beings travel by the hundreds, so the watchers who arrived in Enoch's land were more accurately an all-male army in exile, and more specifically those who were loyal to Cronus. Enoch uses, quote-unquote, watcher, as a description of employment, knowing how the Atlanteans engaged in projects with other human cultures all over the world. The true Atlantean watchers were ambassadors who left the kingdom and lived among these other humans, tasked by King Atlas to watch over them with goodwill, not intermarry or impose themselves as rulers. Of course, the expelled followers of Cronus did not adhere to that model, and they intermarried and had children to perpetuate their legacy. According to Enoch, these fallen watchers made a pact among themselves to take human wives and have children by them, though they remarked that doing so would be a great sin. They decided that they did not care for the moral rectitude of their Atlantean origins and proceeded to go to the tribes around the area, take Natufian women, impregnate them, and teach them to be like the Atlantean women in dress, makeup, and behavior. The resulting offspring were called the Nephilim. Enoch describes the Nephilim as awful people, great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, which is, of course, an exaggeration, though they were noticeably taller than the Natufians. He says they consumed all the acquisitions of men and taxed away all of their property. They began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, as well as humans, devouring their flesh and drinking their blood. These Nephilim continued their forefathers' hatred for mankind, viewing humans as a source of labor or food, nothing more. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls were 2 other books describing this time of the Watchers. The Book of Giants is told from the perspective of the Nephilim, while the Book of Jubilees is told from the Atlanteans' perspective. Along with the Book of Enoch, these ancient texts provide a varied account of this time, an account that is corroborated in anthropological and genetic evidence. As you have learned, the Atlantean exiles landed at Mount Hermon and sailed down the River Jordan closer to the Dead Sea and found a city in an area dominated by Natufians. Coinciding with the timing of that journey is evidence of the new DNA injected into the Natufians via a descendant of the Atlantean Y haplogroup, the Sons of God, E-Z827. At this time and in this place, a submutation called E-M81, the Sons of Cronus, was brought from the Maghreb into the Levant. Natufians did not have a sophisticated language, whereas the Ibero-Maurasians, whom you know as the Atlanteans, spoke the Afro-Asiatic languages. The Nephilim taught this language to the Natufians, which eventually evolved into all the Semitic languages, as revealed by the study of linguistics, a science similar to the study of DNA, which traces how all extant languages descended from the ancestral ones. Scientists today know of the Mushabian culture, a catch-all term for any evidence of Ibero-Maurasians in the Levant, and researchers have never narrowed the culture to a particular place in time. Throughout human history, these Ibero-Maurasians seem to appear and then disappear all over the region, including near Jericho, a city at least 10,000 years old, that is considered the world's oldest city by mainstream archaeology, though you, seeker of truth, know the truly oldest city was Atlantis. Archaeological exploration of Jericho has revealed that the city had walls and a highly developed defense system, evidence that it had been a Nephilim stronghold. Thus the stories, the archaeology, and the genetic and linguistic facts all align, confirming your real history. The Ibero-Maurasians took their technology, their genetics, and their language to Mesopotamia and then to Levant, imposing their ways on the people already living there. Birth of God Kings. You undoubtedly learned in your childhood that human civilization began in the Fertile Crescent, but it did not. This is a false history from the Nephilim, the children of the Watchers and their Natufian wives. They are the ones who have darkened the human mind and deprived you of your history. As previously recounted, Mesopotamian myths say godlike beings created humanity, and the Bible says God created Adam. These are all distortions by those who crave power, the Nephilim, in order to insert a message into the cultural mythos and ensure their perpetuation as the ruling class. For these Nephilim are none other than god kings who continued ideas of enslavement and population control originally imposed by the fallen Watcher Enlil, leader of the Mesopotamian gods. His ideas were carried on his ideas were carried on by these children, self-appointed divine rulers who wreaked havoc on humanity. The Nephilim have so successfully distorted history that the Bible even describes these beings as heroes of old, men of renown, painting them as forces of good when they were actually forces of the most evil kind. The false stories perpetuated by these god kings causes humans to see themselves as lesser beings and to readily accept the ruling class's authority over them. And this dynamic continues to this day. In telling the history of the Atlanteans behind the myths, Diodorus cracked the ruler's facade, and now you see, seeker of truth, are called to tear it down. From the land between two rivers, and then Abu Huraira, I think that's how you pronounce that. The Nephilim fanned out, spreading through the Levant and as far as modern-day Greece. In those days, the inhabitants of the region were called Pelasgians, and their ancient founder hero was Pelasgus. I think that's how you pronounce that. Try my best to pronounce the names in this book. It's a bit tricky here and there, and the writing is really small, but I'm doing my best. Bear with me. Many of the Greek mythological or mythical characters, including Zeus, Hephaestus, Poseidon, the Atlas, came from gods already worshipped by the Pelasgians, the first group of the Nephilim to enter the land that became Greece. Plato mentions one of the Nephilim in Critias, the mythical founding king of Athens named Erechtheus, or Erichthonius, who existed thousands of years before there were Greek people, and of whom every Athenian would have known. Erechtheus was the oldest of a pair of identical twins, just like the Platonic Atlantean king Atlas, and his twin brother name was Bute. Echoing the Platonic tale of Atlas' parentage, Erechtheus and Bute were the sons of the gods and the earth, the Greek way of describing the coupling of male Atlantean and an indigenous woman. In this case, represents the Hephaestus and Gaia. Hephaestus is known as the god of metallurgy and weapon making, skills taught by the Enochian watcher Azazel. You see why there's such a big archaeological cover-up in the United States of America, and why, in the 1800s when the archaeologists were discovering all the Nephilim giant skeletons, how the Smithsonian Institution was instructed to take all the skeletons and all the evidence of what this book is talking about and hide it. Is it all making sense now? These same bloodline descendants, they've been ruling over us through the politicians. All these big politicians, like all the presidents, they're all bloodline descendants of these Nephilim, these watchers, these Atlanteans, of Enlil. Being a direct descendant of Hephaestus made Erechtheus, Erechtheus, a first-generation Nephilim, offspring of the fallen Watchers. But he presented himself like an Atlantean king because he would not stand for being cast as the bastard son of an evil angel. Based on the book of Enoch, the Nephilim, like Erechtheus, were capricious, lascivious, murderous rulers who taxed, starved, impoverished, and cannibalized the humans beneath them. Oh, just like the government does today. Coincidence? All right, let's continue. Yet, because of the Nephilim's distortion of history, the Greeks praised Erechtheus as a great hero, just as the writer of Genesis spoke positively of the Nephilim who roamed the earth. It's still going on today. I mean, look at how they give like Nobel Peace Prizes. The Nobel Peace Prize, they gave it to people like Barack Obama, who is just a murderer and a puppet. You see where all this stuff comes from? Like it's been going on for thousands of years. This book is just like confirming everything that I've been talking about on this channel for like years and years. So this is a really great book. I'm really enjoying this so far. It's connecting a lot of dots here. Erechtheus' presentation of himself as an Atlantean king with the right to rule marks the beginning of the sacral king or imperial cult practice, which holds that the king is God's son, or God's representative on earth who rules by divine right. Belief in the special powers possessed by this ruling class resurfaces throughout history around the world in various cultures, all from the original assertion of divine rule by the Nephilim of the E-Z827 haplogroup, who recasts the story of Atlas. Yep, that's where it all comes from. Everyone's just practicing one big religion, and they don't even know it. Doesn't matter whether you're a Christian, a Catholic, a Mormon, a statist, and you worship the government. You're all practicing one big religion, just under a different name. But it all leads back to this. For many millennia, people ruled as gods, having arrived with greater stature and technology, impressing the primitive peoples. They are myriad manifestations of king worship, the mandate of heaven in China, the divine right of kings in Europe, the imperial cults of Rome and the Far East, the sacred kings in Babylonia, and the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. All of these societies for thousands of years practice this belief in the king as a god because of the distortions of oppression wrought by fallen angels or fallen watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. This author put this together. It's so good here. All right, next part says, from end to end of the earth. Slowly the Nephilim took over the whole region, ruling the Levant and everything around the eastern Mediterranean, from Turkey to what became Greece. According to Enoch, the people were oppressed and suffering greatly under these kings. They were murdered, lied to, and lied about, and they looked to God, the king of Atlantis, for help. They did not have the weapons, skill, or ability to fight and overthrow the giants of their own. So they prayed to King Atlas, and eventually their desperate cries became impossible for the king to ignore. Enoch lived in the land of Dan, north of the Sea of Galilee, and he tells of walking by the river Dan, by Mount Hermon, where the Watchers landed. On that walk, God, the Atlantean king, contacted him telepathically to deliver a message to the fallen Watchers that they would never return to Atlantis and would not ascend to heaven because of the many atrocities they had committed. Atlantis. Subsequently, the Atlanteans collected Enoch from Palestine, taking him aloft on the chariots of the Spirit to embark on a 23,000-kilometer journey across the planet, which is retold in the Book of Enoch, though not in a linear fashion because of the way the book itself was pieced together from a collage of separate stories. Sounds like they took him in a spaceship. Or at least some kind of advanced flying machine. Seeker of truth, know this. While the trip Enoch describes may sound impossible, it is clear that he must have gone on that exact journey. Even 2,500 years ago, no one could have described the geographic features, people, animals, and plant life he encountered on that trip, except by having seen it all with their own eyes. From the Levant, the Watcher, took Enoch west to the ends of the earth. I'm just going to quote the Book of Enoch here. And in those days, a whirlwind carried me off from the earth and set me down at the end of the heavens. And there I saw another vision, the dwelling places of the holy and the resting places of the righteous. Here mine eyes saw their dwellings with his righteous angels and the resting places with the holy. In Atlantis, exactly as Plato described, Enoch saw multitudes beyond his ability to reckon. 10,000 times 10,000 people, all having white skin, blonde, white, or red hair, fair eyes and beards, and an unidentified red feature referring to armpit or pubic hair. He also met, quote-unquote, God, the Atlantean king, and saw the place where the first fathers were buried, a reference to the very beginning of humanity in a cave at Jebel Irhoud. The Atlanteans had all manner of technology, the likes of which Enoch had never seen, and he struggled to find the words to describe what he witnessed and touched. His stories are told in the language of a technologically primitive being confused and awed by his new surroundings. So you must read between the lines. The king showed him a structure made of crystal, a telescope at the Royal Observatory, and he saw God and his angels entering and leaving this place, using the telescope to study the heavens. For as you learn from Diodorus, the great civilization developed the science of astronomy. In the observatory, the Atlanteans used a telescope to show him the cluster of debris on a path to destroy the world, which they said would arrive in 70 generations, 1,400 years, and release Enoch's people from the yoke of the Nephilim. The present-day geological record shows that debris in fact made impact 12,800 years ago. If you add 1,400 years to the account for the moment Enoch received these predictions, you will find that Enoch's visit to Atlantis took place 14,200 years ago, in the middle of the Silver Age, when Atlantis had become a major civilization and the Nephilim's E-M81 haplogroup emerged in the Levant. As in all cases, the story and the genetic records align. In the astronomy lesson, Enoch also learned about supernovas and nebulae. As the Atlanteans explained, stars could change and never regain their original form, demonstrating their astronomical knowledge and ability to foreshadow the cosmic impact. Enoch calls a supernova a lightning, which can be a blessing or a curse upon Earth. The Atlanteans knew stars exploded and could affect the earth, as their earliest ancestors had passed down knowledge regarding the devastation of the supernova 26,000 years earlier. Because of those legends, as soon as the Atlanteans developed telescopes and took them to the high mountains, they searched the sky for the remains of evil, or of the evil sun, the evil second sun, and found the debris. Thus, by the time Enoch's visit, they had long been monitoring the celestial aftermath, and Enoch says the coming destruction was known since the beginning of time, meaning before the founding of Atlantis. The Canary Islands. After that astronomy lesson, Enoch traveled across the Atlantic Ocean, where conditions were chaotic, a common way of describing the open ocean at its undulations in the ancient world. He speaks of seeing 7 mountains rising up out of the chaos, and there is only one set of 7 islands near West Africa, the Canary Islands. Enoch names the 7 archangels and their respective domains, saying Uriel, his guide, ruled over Tartarus. He learned that Tartarus, where Cronus was imprisoned, was in fact the Atlanteans' prison island of Tenerife, one of the volcanic Canary Islands, and he tells a story similar to that of Atlas holding up the world in recounting the formation of those 7 islands. Again, a recurring number also seen in the 7 archangels, 7 sages, and the 7 Pleiades, or the Pleiades, 7 Pleiades, sorry. The archangel Uriel told Enoch the islands were in water because they were stars being punished for not rising at their appointed times. They were sent down and forced to endure 10,000 years on Earth. In the Atlanteans' practice of stellar worship, being sent down to Earth was a punishment, while being raised up into the heavens was a reward. The Atlantean mythos draws a connection between people and stars, events in the sky, and events on Earth, personifying stars and islands. People with particularly high honors would have a star named after them, and the island formation myths fits this pattern of mythology, calling stars down to Earth as punishment, where they existed as burning mountains. Because of its great potential for astronomical seeing, the island of Tenerife had observatories then and still does to the present day. There is an ancient caldera on the island, today known as Las Cañadas, that blew up spectacularly 170,000 years ago, and the geology shows its intense activity with rivers of lava pouring out, which Enoch describes as columns of fire, rivers of fire, burning sulfur and brimstone. He also mentions seeing hollow places, deep and wide and very smooth. These are lava tubes formed by the continuous eruption from the volcano that can still be seen today at La Cueva del Viento. Tartarus on Tenerife is also where the Atlantean king imprisoned all of the fallen watchers. As an angel tells Enoch, Tenerife with its volcano, Teide, is where shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. That's referencing the book of Enoch. The account of Enoch is confirmed in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. Some translations of this passage from the Bible say, God cast the fallen angels into hell, but others correctly use the word Tartarus. Here the watchers shall remain forever chained to the earth, never to return to the heaven or incarnate on another world with their Atlantean brothers. On this planet they remain, incarnating into human being after human being, leading the rest of humanity astray. To this day, their followers use dark magical practices to summon a particular soul into the body of a baby, that of a watcher or Nephilim. Wow, that's pretty interesting stuff. All of the fallen watchers received the same punishment, except for Azazel, to whom the king ascribed all sin and ordered that he be buried alive. In Hebrew lore, Azazel is looked upon as a devil, and in every tradition, he is an evil entity. As the ages passed and the Nephilim edited history to frame themselves in more positive light, this prison for fallen angels became a mythical paradise known as Elysium, resting place of the ancient Greek heroes, a chain of islands referred to as the Blessed or Fortunate Isles. In their retelling, the Nephilim transformed hell on earth into a heaven ruled by Cronus and located in the Western Ocean at the edge of the world. And those Nephilim, who are only half Atlantean, will be punished in different way through wars waged on one another and through the coming of the Son of Man. You likely have been taught that the Son of Man is Jesus, but this is not so. The Atlanteans personified bodies in the sky, and the Son of Man is no different. Repeatedly in the book of Enoch, the Atlanteans tell Enoch that the Son of Man is coming down to earth to sit on his throne, and that when he does, all of the nations and kings of the earth will be laid low by floods and fire and unimaginable destruction. The Atlanteans were speaking not of Jesus, but of the cluster of comet debris heading towards Earth, the debris seen through their telescopes on Mount Atlas and Teide. Enoch goes on to say, and the seventh mountain was in the midst of these and excelled them in heights, describing Teide, which is the middle of the islands and is the highest peak in all of Spain. Measured from the seafloor, it is the third highest volcano in the world after Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. He describes the peak as, and it's quoting the book of Enoch again, he describes the peak as resembling the seat of a throne, and fragment trees encircled the throne, and amongst them was a tree such as I had never yet smelt, neither was any amongst them, nor were others like it. It had a fragrance beyond all fragrance, and its leaves and blooms would wither not forever. And its fruit is beautiful, and its fruit resembles the dates of a palm. The description of that tree aligns with the date palm of Tenerife and all the Canary Islands. Phoenix canariensis, an appropriate name for the plant which that withers not forever. You have no doubt seen this particular palm in tropical resorts around the world and on the American continents to this day. In Enoch's day, though the tree existed only in the Canary Islands, and he could only have seen it by visiting there. Cape Verde. After visiting Tenerife, Enoch left the 7 islands and traveled towards the center of the earth, the equator, and reached another chain of islands known as Cape Verde. All these places would have been accessible by sailing but multiple times he recounted being taken up into the air. He accurately described the flora, fauna, and and the geography of each place to which he went, which should persuade you beyond all doubt that his stories are based on real events, not fabrications. When visiting Atlantis at the beginning of his journey, Enoch saw people being dragged from their homes. In Cape Verde, he saw the same people and learned they were being punished as malcontents and agitators, supporters of Cronus who, quote-unquote, deny the name of the Lord of Spirits and utter with their lips against the Lord unseemly words, and of his glory speak hard things. Uriel tells Enoch those on Cape Verde will survive, and they shall bless him for the mercy in accordance with which he has assigned them. They would not suffer the same fate of the fallen watchers who were destined to die by the comet. The other end of the earth, after Cape Verde, they traveled 15,000 kilometers as the crow flies to the other end of the earth, to what is now Indonesia, given Enoch's detailed descriptions and the order in which he presents them. The Atlanteans must have used their technology to fly him across the globe for sailing would have taken him on a different route, one that would have offered him different sights from different vantage points. To have seen what he recounts, Enoch must have been in the air. Enoch describes leaving Cape Verde and seeing all the paths and routes of the angels, the Tamanrasset River, and other sailing routes used by the Atlanteans. He flew over the ancient biblical lands of Havilah in North Africa, and hence went over the summits of all these mountains far towards the east of the earth. That's referencing the book of Enoch. Lots of references in here from the book of Enoch. It's pretty much like the whole next couple pages is just referencing the book of Enoch. Enoch passed over the Arabian Peninsula where he saw trees similar to the almond tree. Such trees have, in fact, been growing on the western coast of Arabia for thousands of years. Jabal al-Lawz, an ultra-prominent peak in the Median Mountains, literally means almond mountain in Arabic. And today the almond tree blossoms in Al-Baha province, or the blossoms in Al-Baha province are said to blanket the mountain range like snow. Enoch also describes the fragrance of frankincense and myrrh on the eastern coast of the Arabian Peninsula, both of which grow plentifully in present-day Oman and Yemen. He continued east, passing above the Erythraean Sea, today's Persian Gulf, and then to the site of the legendary Indian holy city Dvarka, built by Krishna, another traveling Atlantean. Dvaraka, sorry, these words are difficult to pronounce, bear with me. Dvaraka was later destroyed in a flood, and beginning in 1983, archaeologists have discovered and excavated the submerged city in present-day India in the Gulf of Cambay. They came to the Garden of Righteousness in India, where Enoch saw sugar cane, cinnamon, cardamom, and pepper, all native Indian plants. He also saw many large trees, including the tree of wisdom, where they eat and know great wisdom. Raphael, another archangel with Uriel, tells Enoch, "This is the tree of wisdom, of which thy father, old in years, and thy aged mother, who were before thee, have eaten, and they learned wisdom, and their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked, and they were driven out of thy garden, or of the garden. Thy father and thy mother, of course, are the Kebaran, Adam, and Eve, the woman fetched from the Levant to be his wife." The tree of wisdom precisely matches descriptions of the jamun fruit tree called Syzygium cumini, which is native to India. Enoch compares it to plants he knew from the Mediterranean, saying that that tree in its height, like the fir, and its leaves are like those of the carob tree, and its fruit is like the clusters of the vine. A fir tree grows 30 to 50 meters tall, like the jamun tree, and the leaves and the fruit of the latter also uncannily match the Mediterranean analogs mentioned by Enoch. Earlier in their history, the Atlanteans had visited India and noted the valuable healing properties of the jamun. The fruit of the tree is able to lower blood sugar, which was useful to civilization starting to eat carbohydrates. They took one tree back to Atlantis and planted it in the Garden of Eden, where it became the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In addition to its biblical references, the jamun fruit tree remains a holy tree in Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. According to the Buddhists, the land from whence the jamun tree comes, Jambudvipa, is an island made up of concentric rings of land and water. Does this sound like Atlantis? From India, Enoch says he continued to the quote-unquote ends of the earth and saw their great beasts, and each differed from the other. And I saw birds also differing in appearance and beauty and voice, the one differing from the other. And to the east of those beasts I saw the ends of the earth, which you know as the Pacific Ocean, whereon the heaven rests, and the portals of the heaven open. Here Enoch refers to the moon and the stars rising up out of the horizon. Continuing in his straight line, he flew to Sundaland, modern-day Indonesia, and remembered in myth as Lemuria, renowned for its biodiversity to this day. Cats and birds of all shapes, sizes, and stripes substantiating the truth of Enoch's observations. Southern Indonesia is where you will find Gunung Padang, a terraced pyramid your archaeologists are just beginning to excavate. Over the millennia, it has become completely overgrown by the jungle. Scientists have drilled cores from the top and recovered items at least 20,000 years old, putting its creation within the time frame of Atlantis and Dvaraka. Now you know Enoch's journey and the details of what he saw and recorded. The journey was real, not mythological. He describes a tree, or a real tree from India, not an imagined plant, one of which he could have learned only by seeing it. His journey was 23,000 kilometers long, a voyage he could not have traveled unless he was flying, using the incomparable technological abilities of the Atlanteans held 14,000 years ago. The man God took. After Gunung Padang, P-A-D-A-N-G, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, the Atlanteans returned Enoch to his home in the Levant, saying they would leave him there for 1 year to teach his son Methuselah, to teach him everything they had taught him. Then they would bring him back to Atlantis to live with them for the rest of his days. In the book of Enoch, there is no record of the year he spent teaching his son before returning to Atlantis, but that record does exist in the Hermetica, Hermes Trismegistus. The Hermetica, a collection of texts written by Hermes Trismegistus. Of these texts, one of the prime sources is the Asclepius, the earliest fragments of which are from the Nag Hammadi library of Gnostic Christian texts, which contains Christian materials and Jewish materials, as well as the Hermetic texts. So important were the works of Hermes that, when the agent of Cosimo del Medici discovered a Greek version of Hermes' other great work, the Corpus Hermeticum, in Florence nearly 600 years ago. Medici ordered the agent to cease his translations of Plato to focus entirely on translating the newly recovered, far more significant work. Here is a truth of which you might be aware. Early Jews and Christians believed Enoch and Hermes were one and the same person, and they were not alone. The early alchemist Zosimus of Panopticus, let me try to pronounce that again. Panopolis noted their similarities over 1,700 years ago in his writing to a fellow alchemist, Theosebia, in the 9th book of Eyemouth. This work is lost, but an excerpt is contained in the Chronographia of George Syncellus, a Byzantine chronicler. Zosimus describes a lost Hermetic work called Physica. Trying to get through these words the best I can. Physica, contrasting it with the work of Enoch. The Holy Scriptures, that is, the books, say, my lady, that there is a race of demons who avail themselves of woman. Hermes also mentioned this in the Physica. And nearly every treatise, both public and esoteric, made mention of this. Thus the ancient and divine scriptures said this, that certain angels lusted after women, and having descended, taught them all the works of nature. Having stumbled because of these women, he says, they remained outside heaven, because they taught mankind everything wicked and nothing benefiting the soul. The same scriptures say that from them the giants were born. Yeah, the Nephilim giants. The fallen angels having sex with the daughters of men, says that in the Bible. So theirs is the first teaching concerning these arts handed down by Chemiu. He called this book of Chemiu, whence also the art is called alchemy, and so forth. Enoch is but one name for this person whose story has been passed down in many cultures. Because this Natufian was picked up by the Atlanteans and flown all over the world, many accounts have come forth, and in different places, the storytellers remembered him by different names. In Greece, he was Hermes Trismegistus. In the Levant, Enoch. In Egypt, Thoth. In Arabia, Idris. All of these literary characters describe the same person who learned from the great civilization of Atlantis. Enoch the scribe, Hermes the scribe, Thoth the scribe, and Idris are all teachers of humanity, sources of science, alchemy, and the knowledge of wisdom of the gods. To counterbalance the corrupt teachings of the fallen watchers, the stories overlap to a remarkable degree because they all describe the same person who, according to the Book of Jubilees, was the first man able to read and write. The Book of Enoch offers a fragment of the entire picture, but you will find much more of his experience in other books under different names, chiefly the Asclepius, the Asclepius, and the Corpus Hermeticum. Hermes Trismegistus makes a direct reference to what happened in the Levant and what the Atlanteans did to prepare for the coming cataclysm wrought by the Son of Man, which you know was the debris from the supernova. The Asclepius explains the most unbelievable things Hermes learned on his trip from end to end of the earth, told in as many ways as he can, so his son will understand all the knowledge he has gained. The credits to Hermes are legion, as the inventor of alchemy, philosophy, and mathematics, and as the developer of the knowledge of humanity. Asclepius is a friend of Hermes' son, Tat, or Tat, and the text appears as a discourse among them. Each chapter illuminates a different subject matter, such as the immortality of the soul, the nature of man and gods, and the coming destruction of the earth. The Corpus Hermeticum similarly elucidates his great accumulated knowledge. Consider this quote from the Asclepius. How grievous will be the withdrawal of gods from men. Only the evil angels will remain, mingling with humanity. They will force these wretches into all the evils of violence, wars, robbery, fraud, and all those things which are contrary to the nature of the soul. Well, that explains how we got into be in the situation that we're in now with our fake money systems and central banks and debt enslavement systems and code statutes and city ordinances and QR codes and barcodes and social security numbers and federal tax ID numbers and driver's license numbers to track and monitor us and extort us and tax us. It all makes perfect sense, according to this narrative. Elsewhere, in the Asclepius, Hermes describes Atlanteans as monks living in a temple, subsisting on offerings and gifts that people bring them. He shows how the corrupted watchers behave quite differently, exploiting the human laborers around them. Further on, Hermes describes an important discovery of Enoch's journey, something that underscores the Atlanteans' understanding of the heavens and history of the cosmic cataclysm headed towards Earth. He explains that the Atlanteans, those gods who rule the earth, will be dispersed and then settled in a town at the very extremity of Egypt, which will be founded towards the setting sun, and to which the whole race of the mortals will hasten both land and sea. Hermes is referring to the northwest region of Egypt, the Giza Plateau, where today you find the pyramids and the Sphinx. During his journey, Enoch flew over this region and saw the Atlanteans' undertakings in Egypt. He knew a great cataclysm was coming, and that the impact would likely cause an enormous tidal waves and flooding as far inland as the great capital city near the Atlantic coast. Enoch saw their preparations as they readied to transplant that seat of their civilization. Some of your scientists theorize that the Sphinx is more than 8,000 years old, which is correct. It was, in fact, built by the Atlanteans much earlier than that. The original head of the Sphinx was the head of a lion, but it eroded until it became unrecognizable, at which time the Egyptians carved its head into a pharaoh and called it their own. As you shall learn, the supernova debris did in fact make impact in the start of the age of Leo, roughly 12,800 years ago. And in that age, the Atlanteans' original reposing lion face, it faced the sun on the equinox as the sun rose in the sign of Leo on earth as it is in heaven. The Sphinx gazed upon its celestial self on the equinoxes. The hidden truth. In addition to the philosophical Hermetic texts, the Asclepius and the Corpus Hermeticum, there is another body of Hermetic work called the Technical Hermetic Materials, which remain untranslated, meaning the general public does not have access to the vast majority of Hermetic material. Much Atlantean knowledge is not accessible because the ruling class has controlled that information. Yeah, that's what I've been saying for like last 8 years on YouTube and on Instagram and on TikTok. Yeah, they got it all hidden in the Vatican archives where no one gets to see it. Why is it not common knowledge that Diodorus talks at lengths about the Atlanteans? Why are more people not familiar with Hermes Trismegistus or Enoch? Why did the search for Atlantis stop being funded shortly after the Risha structure was found? And why was its discovery not touted around the world with fanfare exceeding that of Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy? As late as 1915, French researcher Pierre Termier published a paper in the annual report of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institute about the latest findings in the search of Atlantis. It is not accidental that all of these discoveries were silenced by academia. Well, yeah, of course, the Smithsonian Institute, that's the Matrix, the Matrix-controlled organization that sweeps all these archaeological discoveries under the rug. Excuse me. Hermes, Enoch, wanted to preserve the knowledge of the Atlanteans for his descendants of the world. But the ruling class has largely suppressed that information and prevented its translation, preventing seekers of truth, such as yourself, from learning about them and their evil intent towards mankind. Yeah, that's why I come on here and read all these books. I'm always trying to find more translations and more hidden tablets and things about Hermes Trismegistus, because this dude had all the knowledge. The rest of his days, after Enoch spent a year in the Levant teaching Methuselah, the Atlanteans took him to Atlantis, where he spent the rest of his days walking with God, as it says in Genesis. Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah, and Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years, and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Supporting the biblical account, the book of Enoch says, "And it came to pass after this, meaning the year Enoch taught his son, that his name during the lifetime was raised aloft to that Son of Man, to the Lord of spirits," meaning he was taken into space to see the comet coming, and then to Atlantis. He was raised aloft on the chariots of the spirits, a vessel built by the Atlanteans, and his name vanished among them. He was not, in the sense, he was no longer seen in the Levant, for the Atlanteans took him to their kingdom. During the time when Enoch walked with God in Atlantis, he took an Atlantean wife and begot sons and daughters with mixed Natufian and Iberomaurusian blood. The scientific record of the Taforalt cave supports this truth, as the DNA found in 6 male bodies has 2/3 Natufian and 1/3 Iberomaurusian. All 6 males were E-M78, the line of Adam. Researchers dated these bodies and found they were 13,900 to 15,000 years old, and the descendants of Enoch buried in the cave because they were people of importance. Hard scientific evidence for the biblical story of Enoch and his intermarrying with the Atlanteans. Pretty interesting stuff. I mean, yeah, this book is connecting all kinds of dots. Godlike descendants. Whenever an ancient culture describes what their gods looks like, invariably they give us the same description: beings with light skin and blonde or red hair. Likewise, in modern UFO abduction stories, people report being taken by beings who match this fair skin and fair hair depiction. How can this be? The answer is quite plain if you have eyes to see. They are all talking about the same civilization of people who traveled the world, made contact with all the different cultures, and spawned the myriad myths and religions. The Atlanteans, the Kibarians, and the Levant had darker skin and much darker hair than the Atlanteans and the Ibermorusians. Enoch was from this region, and he shared the darker complexion. Sumerians, one of the first great civilizations of Mesopotamia, are not Israelites, but their name literally means the black-headed people. Noah, however, was different. Enoch describes his great-grandson Noah, the builder of the ark, as having skin whiter than snow, hair whiter than wool, another feature, possibly body hair, redder than the bloom of a rose, and eyes like the rays of the sun. In short, Noah had the likeliness of the angels of heaven. And that's again referencing the book of Enoch. Thus there can be no doubt as to the appearance of the Atlanteans, angels, and the gods of old. The Great Flood. Let us close with the book of Jubilee, similar to Genesis, but written from the perspective of the angels. Like the book of Enoch, it is another book of the Apocrypha, and it says of Enoch. And now we're going to quote the book of Jubilees. It says, "And he was taken from amongst the children of men, and we conducted him into the Garden of Eden in majesty and honor, and beheld, there he writes down the condemnation and judgment of the world, and all the wickedness of the children of men. And on account of it, God brought the waters of the flood upon all of the land of Eden, for there he was set as a sign, and that he should testify against all of the children of men, that he should recount all the deeds of the generations until the day of condemnation." The flooding of Eden, Atlantis, ushered in the Bronze Age. Okay, that is the end of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 is entitled The Bronze Age, and we'll continue that in another upload. Pretty fascinating book, if you ask me. I mean, this is really good stuff here. It's so incongruent with a lot of the other stuff I've been studying and sharing on this channel for years and years and years.